The storm hit Aurelia Floats like the planet itself wanted to shake the city loose. Veyron hunched his shoulders against the sideways rain, boots slapping across the trembling walkway that clung to the edge of the floating district. Neon. Signs flickered, reflected in the black waves of the Veyron Sea below. Wind howled through the steel struts, and the whole city groaned like a living thing. He hated coming home on nights like this. His apartment sat on the lower rim of Spire District, a rickety slice of cheap housing that swayed whenever the waves were rough. By the time he reached the door, water dripped from his jacket in steady streams. He pressed his palm to the scanner, and the lock clicked open with a tired beep. The lights didn't come on. Jalen frowned. He'd left the system on low when he left that morning. The room smelled faintly of ozone and something else, damp metal maybe. He stepped inside, boots squelching on the worn floor tiles, and scanned the darkness. Clang. He froze. Somewhere deeper in the apartment, metal rattled against metal. His heart rate jumped, the reflexes of a soldier not entirely dulled by civilian life. He reached for the stun baton he kept by the door, thumbing the trigger until it hummed with a soft blue glow. "Who's there?" His voice barely carried over the wind outside. Another noise, this one closer, the slow slide of a drawer shutting. Then silence. Jalen's mind raced. Break-ins were rare on Aurelia Floats. Most people were too busy surviving to risk trouble, but the city had been strange lately. Rumors about shadow traffic, off-world visitors, and the military quietly expanding patrols around the orbital fringe. He edged toward the kitchen, baton ready. The apartment wasn't big. 2 rooms, a closet, and a kitchenette crammed against the far wall. Something moved. A pale flash, like light on glass, glimmered in the corner of his eye. He spun, baton raised, and froze. A tall, lean figure crouched by the open fridge. Humanoid. Almost. Its skin was a smooth gray-green, shifting in tone under the glow of the fridge light. Large black eyes reflected him in miniature, and a crest of faintly luminous tendrils quivered along its head like a living crown. For a second, neither of them moved. Then the creature picked up a jar of instant soup, sniffed it, and sneezed. The sound was bizarrely human, high-pitched and startled. Jalen's grip faltered on the baton, disbelief tangling with the old soldier's instinct to act first, think later. The alien tilted its head, blinking its reflective eyes at him. "This, your dwelling?" Jalen opened his mouth, then closed it again. Lightning flashed outside, casting long, jagged shadows through the apartment. The storm roared like the ocean itself wanted in. He had no idea yet that letting this stranger stay would drag him from his quiet, miserable life into a war he thought he'd left behind. Veyron sat on the edge of his narrow bunk, the storm outside still clawing at the walls of Spire District. The alien figure in his kitchen hadn't moved for a while, only sniffing around with quiet curiosity, and for now, Jalen let it be. He ran a hand over his face, water dripping from his hair, and tried to slow his racing thoughts. He had been out of uniform for 7 months, yet the war still clung to him like the salt air on Aurelia Floats. In the army, every day had a purpose. Wake, up, train, deploy, survive. Now he lived in a box, bolted to the side of a floating city, waiting for the next rent cycle to eat him alive. His neighbors were either too tired or too suspicious to talk. Sometimes he didn't speak to anyone for days. The memories came as they always did when the city went quiet, if the storm could ever be called quiet. The red glare of emergency beacons, the thrum of engines in zero-gravity corridors. A squadmate's laugh cut short in static when the Krynn Dominion ships had breached their defense line. He could still hear the muffled echoes of rifle fire, the hollow clanging of bulkheads shuddering under orbital strikes. He reached for the datapad on his nightstand and flicked it on. The listing he had posted for a roommate still sat at the top of the feed. Cheap unit, 2 rooms, Spire District, must tolerate storms. Quiet preferred. It was meant to keep him afloat, literally and financially. But the idea of sharing his space with a stranger had felt desperate. He hadn't expected anyone to answer so quickly. He certainly hadn't expected whatever was in his kitchen right now. A soft chirrup broke his thoughts. Jalen turned his head to see the alien crouched in the doorway, holding an empty water bottle upside down like a puzzle. "You, human," it said, the words halting but clear. "Is lonely, normal?" Jalen blinked. For a moment, the question hit harder than any artillery shell he'd faced in orbit. He opened his mouth, but the words tangled somewhere between pride and exhaustion. The storm gave a deep groan, metal joints of the city straining under the waves, and the alien tilted its head, listening. It seemed perfectly at home with the chaos outside. Jalen wasn't sure if he should laugh, answer, or throw it out into the rain. The storm had started to fade into a heavy drizzle, but inside Jalen's apartment, chaos was only beginning. He watched as the alien, Karen Till, as it finally introduced itself in a series of melodic clicks and halting syllables, wandered around the living space with wide-eyed fascination. Its bioluminescent crest pulsed faintly, illuminating the dark corners the apartment's lights failed to reach. Karen picked up objects at random, a cracked mug, a tangle of wires, even Jalen's old combat boots. It sniffed each one like a curious animal, muttering in a language that sounded like rain dripping into metal bowls. "Hey, careful!" Jalen lunged forward as Karen poked a finger into the exposed panel of his climate regulator. Sparks leapt, and the alien jerked back, startled, almost tumbling over the coffee table. "You touch nothing," Jalen said, struggling to keep his voice firm. He wasn't used to giving orders anymore, not since leaving the army. Karen blinked, then mimicked his tone. "You touch nothing," Jalen groaned, dragging a hand over his face. Great. A comedian. He tried to set some ground rules, but Karen seemed to interpret his instructions more as suggestions than commands. It climbed onto the kitchen counter to peer out the small window toward the endless Veyron Sea, leaving muddy footprints behind. When Jalen pointed to the mess, the alien crouched, sniffed the prints, and hummed, as if considering them art. Then came the sound, a low, distant rumble, barely perceptible under the groaning of the floating city. Jalen froze. He knew that sound. It didn't belong to weather. It was the echo of heavy engines breaking through the upper atmosphere. Karen's crest flared a bright orange. Its head whipped toward the window, nostrils flaring. "War," it said simply. Jalen's stomach tightened. He stepped closer to the window, squinting past the raindrops. High above Aurelia Floats, the clouds glowed with the brief, unnatural shimmer of plasma drives. A single streak of light broke through, then another, scattering the clouds like fire through smoke. "No, no, no," he muttered. "Not again." Karen suddenly darted to the door, pressing its ear, or what passed for an ear, to the metal frame. "Big ships," it murmured, its broken standard oddly soothing in its simplicity. "Krynn." The name punched a hole in Jalen's chest. The Krynn Dominion, the war he'd tried to leave behind, was here. He felt a sharp pang of irony. He had been desperate for company, and now he had both a roommate and an invasion. Outside, a faint alarm began to wail through Spire District, the kind that signaled military alert but not yet full-scale evacuation. Jalen and Karen stared at each other, both understanding without words. Whatever this was, their quiet life was over. The alarm faded into the background, replaced by the immediate battlefield of Jalen's living room. "Absolutely not," he said, arms crossed as Karen attempted to drag his recliner toward the window. The alien's bioluminescent crest glowed a soft blue in stubborn defiance. "Chair, better—" "Here," Krynn insisted, voice clipped but determined. "It blocks the heater." Krynn tilted its head unimpressed, then sat in the chair, where it had placed it, arms spread wide in victory. Jalen groaned and went to the kitchen to make something, anything, to distract himself from the absurdity of having an alien interior decorator while the Krynn Dominion hovered somewhere above the clouds. Cooking proved no safer. The moment Jalen opened a can of synthetic stew, Krynn was there, sniffing, clicking, and poking its strange fingers into the pan. "Stop that." "Smell, weak," Krynn said, and before Jalen could react, it rummaged in the pouch slung across its chest and dropped a handful of wriggling, translucent creatures into the pot. The stew sizzled, and Jalen recoiled. "What the hell are those?" "Flavor." The alien beamed. Or at least, Jalen thought it was a smile. Against his better judgment, he tasted the stew once it was done. The unexpected burst of savory heat nearly made him choke. He hated to admit it, but it was good, really good. Still, sharing the kitchen with Krynn was like surviving a battlefield. By the time they finished eating, the counter was covered in spilled sauce, alien shells, and one melted spoon. Jalen tried to clean up, but Krynn simply hummed a tune and rearranged his spice rack according to some alien logic. That night, the noise continued. Jalen lay awake in his bunk, listening to Krynn shuffle around, clicking and muttering in its sleep. Occasionally, something thumped to the floor. He sighed, staring at the metal ceiling. He had wanted a roommate to make the apartment feel less empty. Now he wondered if he had just invited chaos into his life. And maybe, just maybe, the kind of chaos he couldn't live without. Somewhere in the distance, the muted hum of engines lingered beneath the storm, a reminder that the city, and their unlikely cohabitation, was about to face far bigger problems. The apartment had finally settled into a fragile silence. Jalen leaned back in his bunk, staring at the dim light strips on the ceiling, when the sharp chime of his wall console shattered the calm. He groaned, rolling out of bed, expecting a mundane utility alert. But when the holographic display flickered to life, his pulse quickened. The screen glowed with the crimson crest of Aurelia Floats' civil defense, accompanied by a low, pulsing tone that spoke of danger. Advisory Level 2. Orbital activity detected. Citizens of Spire District, remain alert and monitor for further instructions. Jalen exhaled slowly. Level 2 wasn't full-scale panic, but it wasn't nothing. It meant someone was up there, moving ships where they didn't belong. A soft rustle behind him made him turn. Krynn stood in the doorway, its crest dim, eyes fixed on the hologram. "War. Soon?" it asked quietly. Jalen hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe they just want to scare us." Krynn drifted closer, almost gliding across the floor. Its gaze lingered on the hologram as the announcement repeated, the voice calm but heavy with unspoken tension. Outside the window, the storm clouds thinned just enough to reveal a faint glow along the horizon, reflected light from something massive moving in low orbit. The city's familiar sounds, distant turbines, the lapping of waves, the hum of hover. Traffic felt different tonight, like the whole floating metropolis was holding its breath. "People here." "Ready?" Krynn asked. Jalen thought of his neighbors, mechanics, vendors, retirees, none of them soldiers. He thought of himself, a man who had run from the sound of engines and the taste of ash. "No," he said finally, "we're not ready for this. Not again." As if to answer him, a deep vibration rolled through the apartment, rattling the dishes in the sink. Somewhere out on the water, a warning siren wailed, carried on the wind. Jalen and Krynn exchanged a look, uneasy, unspoken understanding settling between them. Whatever was coming, their strange little partnership was about to be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. The morning sun filtered through the translucent walls of Veyr's tiny kitchen, painting everything in pale blue light. He had barely rolled out of bed, still groggy, when an unfamiliar scent invaded his nose. Sharp, metallic, and faintly sweet, like hot sugar on rust. He followed the smell into the kitchen of his cramped unit on Aurelia Floats and froze. Krynn. Till was already there, crouched on the counter, long limbs folded like a praying mantis, frills along his neck fluttering with excitement. The alien was holding a glowing, jelly-like orb in one hand and a sizzling iron pan in the other. The pan hissed as the orb liquefied, spitting violet steam into the air. "What the hell are you doing?" Jalen blurted, rubbing his eyes. "Breakfast," Krynn chirped, his accent making the word sound like breakfast. "A traditional Sithari morning starter, good for bones and soul." Jalen opened his mouth to object, but the orb on the pan began to swell, first slowly, then violently. The color shifted from translucent purple to flashing red, and Krynn's frills twitched in alarm. "Wait! That's not supposed to—" "Whump!" A burst of violet smoke filled the kitchen, rattling the window panes. Jalen stumbled back, coughing, as the air shimmered with sparkling residue. The walls dripped with sticky slime that smelled like burnt seaweed and motor oil. A small flame licked the corner of the counter where Krynn's breakfast had detonated. Krynn leapt into action, or rather into chaos, flinging open every cabinet looking for water, but only managing to knock a box of nutrient packs. Onto the floor, Jalen grabbed the emergency foam canister, aimed, and smothered the flame with a hiss. "Are you trying to blow up the entire Spire district before lunch?" he shouted, voice cracking from the smoke. Krynn turned, eyes wide and unblinking, slime dripping from his frills. "Success! The aroma is perfect. First explosion means freshness." Jalen stared, jaw slack. "Freshness? I almost lost my eyebrows." The alien tilted his head, as if studying him like a lab specimen. "Humans are sensitive. Maybe next time, smaller orb." Jalen didn't know whether to laugh or scream. His kitchen looked like a war zone in miniature. A faint vibration hummed under his feet as Aurelia Floats shifted with the waves, and for a split second, he felt the old tension of battlefield mornings creeping back. Except this battlefield smelled like fried alien jelly. Krynn beamed proudly, holding up another orb. "Round 2?" Jalen groaned, covering his face with his hands. "I need so much coffee first." Somewhere outside, the city thrummed, quietly over the endless Veyron Sea, unaware that one unlucky apartment had just survived its first domestic disaster. And in the corner of the kitchen, the glowing residue of Kryn's breakfast pulsed faintly, like it was still alive. By the next day, Veyr was convinced that cohabiting with Krynn Till was going to kill him, if not physically, then mentally. He stepped out of his room to find the living area transformed into a miniature alien habitat. Strands of bioluminescent moss hung from the ceiling fan, pulsing softly, while 3 tiny floating orbs, apparently pets, drifted lazily through the air. One of them bounced off his forehead with a soft plop. "Krynn!" Jalen barked, rubbing the spot. From the kitchen doorway, the alien peeked out, holding a pot of something that sloshed like liquid glass. "They like you. That is a sign of respect on Sithar Prime. I don't need their respect. I need my apartment to stop looking." "Like a science experiment," Krynn blinked innocently. "Experiment? No, this is home improvement." He gestured proudly to a corner where his belongings now towered in teetering stacks. Folded chitin armor plates, an anti-gravity cot, and a jar of wriggling blue worms that emitted a faint hum. Jalen groaned, kicking aside an empty nutrient pack. "I can't even walk in here. And what's that smell?" The alien sniffed, delighted. Home. My people call it Drivela essence. Helps me sleep. Jalen pinched the bridge of his nose, his patience fraying. He had survived trench bombardments and orbital sieges, but sharing a two-room apartment with Krynn Till was quickly proving worse. Their friction spilled into every routine. Krynn sang during showers, deep, echoing notes that made the entire bathroom vibrate. He stored food in the freezer that wriggled when Jalen opened it. And whenever Jalen tried to watch old war hollows for comfort, Krynn perched right next to him, narrating unsolicited commentary in his chirping voice. Yet, beneath the irritation, Jalen caught glimpses of something stranger than annoyance: curiosity. The alien moved with a mix of grace and clumsiness, his joy over the simplest human conveniences: hot water, window blinds, instant coffee, almost childlike. By evening, Jalen collapsed on the couch, glaring at the ceiling. Krynn joined him, uninvited, setting down a glowing cup of tea. "You will adjust," Krynn said softly, frills fluttering. "Humans always adjust." Jalen stared into the neon drink and sighed. He wasn't sure whether he wanted to laugh, yell, or just drink it and hope it didn't explode. Jalen Veyron woke to the deep, vibrating hum that seemed to come from the very bones of Aurelia Floats. It wasn't the usual drone of the city's turbines or the distant rush of the Veyron Sea beneath them. This sound was heavier, more primal, like a warning he hadn't heard in years. He pushed himself off the couch, still half asleep, and shuffled toward the window. Outside, the dawn painted the ocean in streaks of copper and violet. The city's floating spires reflected the light like shards of a broken mirror. But on the horizon, he noticed something wrong, a dark line slicing across the morning sky. Krynn Till appeared behind him, silent for once. The alien's frills pressed flat against his head, a sign Jalen had learned meant fear. "You hear it too," Jalen muttered. Krynn only pointed to the sky. Tiny glimmers danced along the horizon, like a constellation moving where no stars should be. Moments later, the city's orbital scanners broke the morning calm with a sharp siren. A holographic warning flickered to life in the center of their living room. Unauthorized fleet detected. Orbital fringe. Jalen felt his stomach drop. The Krynn Dominion. He hadn't heard that name since he left the military, swearing he'd had his fill of war. Yet here they were again, ships crawling out of the dark like carrion birds. "Your enemies?" Krynn asked quietly, his voice trembling. "Everyone's enemies," Jalen replied. His mind flashed with old memories. The rattle of rifle fire. In zero gravity, the suffocating silence of destroyed habitats, the faces of comrades who never came home. He thought he'd left all that behind, but the hum in the air told him the war had followed him here. The city's defense systems powered up, sending ripples of light across the floating platforms. Anti-orbital cannons rotated into position, their movements sluggish but deliberate. From the streets below, citizens began to spill out of their homes, squinting up at the growing armada in the sky. Krynn hovered close to the window, his eyes wide and reflecting the first orange glow of thruster plumes. "Krynn ships," he said in a whisper. "I know their marks. I fled them once." Jalen turned to him, finally understanding the tension between them. Krynn wasn't just a quirky alien roommate. He was a refugee, and maybe a target. The room shook with a distant rumble as the fleet crossed into Aurelia's orbital boundary. Then came the first announcement over the citywide speakers, voice clipped and metallic. "All civilians remain indoors. Aurelia Defense Protocol is now active." Jalen swallowed hard, his hands curling into fists. He had promised himself he wouldn't fight again, that he was done with war. But as he watched the fleet darken the horizon, he knew peace was over. The evening after the orbital, sirens had wailed, Aurelia Floats felt like it was holding its breath. The usual hum of transport drones and the chatter of neighbors on the walkways had vanished. Jalen Veyron sat on the edge of his narrow balcony, staring out at the endless Veyron Sea, while Krynn Till crouched on the railing, legs folded like a perched bird. For once, neither of them was arguing over fridge space or wet towels on the floor. "You ever think about what it's like to be completely alone?" Jalen asked, his voice low. Karen's frilled head tilted, catching the pale glow of the city's shield lights as they cycled through standby mode. "All the time. My homeworld's moons still spin, but I can't go back. Not after the Krynn burned our skies. I was the last one out of my family dome." Jalen felt a twist in his chest. He thought about his own empty messages folder, the comrades who had gone silent, the family he barely called anymore. "When I left the service, I thought coming here would mean peace. Just fishing boats, quiet streets, and no one asking me to pick up a rifle again. But it's just quiet. Too quiet." Krynn shifted closer, his claws clinking lightly against the metal. "War follows the ones it doesn't kill. My people call it the shadow. You can't run from it. You just learn to live with the weight." The words sank into Jalen like stones in deep water. He saw the alien not as a nuisance, but as someone who carried the same invisible scars. They shared a silence heavy with unspoken memories, ruined outposts, burning seas, the ghosts of those who never came home. Finally, Krynn gave a soft, throaty hum that Jalen recognized as his species' lullaby. Strange, yet comforting. "Maybe. Two shadows together make less dark," he said. Jalen almost smiled. "Yeah, maybe they do." The moment didn't erase the tension of the looming fleet, but it stitched a fragile thread of trust between soldier and refugee. Somewhere out there, the Krynn Dominion plotted their next move. But in this little apartment above the sea, a human and an alien were no longer strangers. The night air over Aurelia Floats buzzed faintly, like static caught in the metal bones of the city. Jalen Veyron had just finished securing the balcony doors when a faint hum rippled through the walls of the apartment. It was too steady to be the wind and too deep to be the sound of passing drones. "Krynn," he said, his voice tight. "You hear that?" Krynn Till was sprawled upside down on the couch, staring at the ceiling like he was listening to the stars. His frilled ears twitched. "Yes, that is not good." A soft blue light began to flicker from the corner of the living room near the base of the old heater. Jalen crouched, pulling aside a dusty vent cover. Behind the grill, something pulsed. A small, crystalline shard, glowing with a rhythmic pattern. "Please tell me you didn't put that there," Jalen muttered. "I did not," Krynn said, dropping to the floor. His tone carried an edge of alarm. "That is a signal node. Very old, very human. Military grade. It's broadcasting." As if on cue, a sharp tone echoed across the city. Jalen recognized it instantly. A tactical sweep. Military sensor drones were passing overhead, scanning the residential blocks. Through the window, beams of blue light raked the towers like fingers, searching for something, or someone. Jalen's stomach knotted. "Why the hell is my apartment broadcasting to the fleet?" Krynn extended a claw, hovering over the shard without touching it. "This is a tracker or a decoy. Either your military wants to watch you, or someone wants them to find you." Before Jalen could answer, the entire apartment flashed with a bright, cold light. A holographic notice flickered to life on the wall. "Aurelia Defense Authority, Residential Unit, 1742 flagged for security check," Krynn hissed softly. "They will be here soon, and they will not knock." Jalen's heart pounded. His instincts screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The walkways outside were already filling with drones, their lights slicing through the sea mist. In the distance, he could see the faint shimmer of the Aurelia shield array powering up, a sign that the Krynn fleet's presence had triggered heightened security. He met Karen's luminous eyes. "If they think we're spies, we're done." The Yafas alien tilted his head. Then we will have to be very convincing or very fast. The humming crystal pulsed faster, syncing with the city's distant alarm. Outside, the low wail of engines grew closer, military patrol ships approaching. Their block. Whatever quiet life Jalen had hoped for was over, and somewhere above the clouds, the Krynn Dominion would soon notice the city was stirring. A sharp metallic clang rattled the thin walls of Jalen Veyr's apartment, jerking him out of the half-sleep he'd been drifting in. For a split second, he thought it was another of Krynn Till's late-night culinary experiments exploding in the kitchen. But then came the voice, mechanical, amplified, and impossible to ignore. Planetary security! Open up! Immediate inspection! Jalen's pulse spiked. He stumbled to his feet, his boots clanging against the steel floor of the apartment in Spire District. Through the rain-streaked window, he caught the ghostly shimmer of Aurelia Floats patrol drones hovering in formation. Their crimson searchlights sliced through the mist rolling off the Veyron Sea, glinting off the flooded walkways and the neighbors' trembling window panes. Behind him, Krynn emerged from the bedroom, his elongated ears twitching and bioluminescent markings dimming in alarm. His voice warbled in a tone Jalen had learned to associate with panic. Humans at the door again? That sound, armed inspection units. Yeah, Jalen muttered, already pulling the energy latch on the apartment's front panel. And if they see you, we're both dead or gone. The pounding escalated, now accompanied by a rising electric hum that suggested the door's magnetic lock might soon be overridden. Jalen's mind ran through a soldier's reflexes. Entry points, cover spots, and worst-case scenarios. He gestured toward the utility crawl space under the floor paneling. Hide. Now. Don't argue. Krynn hesitated, eyeing the narrow space, with obvious disdain. That is small. My spines will... Do you want to survive or not? Jalen hissed. Another crash reverberated, this time making the whole wall shudder. Krynn finally dropped to the floor and squeezed himself into the crawl space, curling his flexible limbs with surprising agility. His luminous eyes winked out as he pulled the panel over his head, leaving only the faintest glow of his skin through the gaps. Jalen took a long, slow breath and pressed the panel release. The door slid open with a reluctant hiss, revealing 3 armored figures in matte blue, the sigil of Planetary Security Authority glowing faintly on their chest plates. The lead officer's visor reflected Jalen's startled face back at him. Citizen Veyr, the officer said, voice filtered through a vocoder, there have been anomalous energy signatures originating from this unit. Step aside. We are conducting a level 3 sweep. Jalen swallowed hard, stepping back as the soldiers fanned into the apartment. Their scanners beeped and clicked, sending holographic ripples across the walls and furniture. The smell of ozone filled the room. Every step they took felt like a countdown to disaster. From beneath the floor, Jalen could almost feel Krynn's suppressed shiver through the metal panels. He forced a casual tone, though sweat slid down his spine. Sure, do your sweep. Haven't exactly had much company lately. The lead officer paused, turning slowly toward the living area as if sensing something. Jalen forced himself to keep his breathing steady as the planetary security officers swept the apartment. One crouched near the window, running a handheld scanner along the seams, while another flipped open cabinets in the kitchenette, letting the doors slam with metallic thuds. Under the floor, Krynn Till remained hidden, but Jalen could almost feel the alien's anxiety radiating upward through the steel panels. He imagined Krynn's bioluminescent patterns flickering with stress, like a beacon that would give them away if anyone looked closely. Sir, said the lead officer, his visor reflecting Jalen's strained face. Records show your unit. Registered multiple power surges and foreign energy spikes last night. Explain. Jalen leaned casually against the counter, doing his best to channel the weary, slightly annoyed ex-soldier persona he had perfected over the past few months. "Probably my old water heater trying to die again," he said. "Or the windstorm, frying half the circuits in the Spire district. You've seen the grid out here. It's ancient." The officer's gaze lingered. Then his partner's scanner chirped loudly, making Jalen's stomach tighten. "Sir, I'm picking up," the officer began, crouching near the floor panel. Jalen reacted on instinct. He staggered forward, knocking over a chair with a loud clatter, and cursed under his breath. "Damn leg cramps. Sorry, you said level 3, right? Are you guys really sweeping every single broke-down unit in Aurelia Floats?" The sudden noise and movement distracted the team just long enough for the scanner's signal to fade behind a passing patrol drone's interference. The officer shook his head, adjusting the device. "False ping! Local interference from sea mist! Continue!" After another tense 5 minutes, the team finally holstered their scanners. The lead officer gave Jalen a slow nod. "Stay alert, Mr. Veyron. The city's under heightened watch. Any anomaly could become a threat." "Understood," Jalen said, keeping his voice even. When the door sealed shut and their footsteps receded down the hall, Jalen exhaled sharply. He knelt, tapping twice on the floor panel. Krynn slid it open, his glowing eyes wide and indignant. "I dislike hiding in holes," he muttered. "Yeah, well," Jalen said, helping him out. "It's better than getting hauled off to some lab." The night sky above Aurelia Floats had never been so deceptively calm. A thin veil of mist rolled over the platforms, and the hum of the ocean's endless swell mingled with the soft buzz of power lines. Jalen Veyron leaned against the railing of the balcony, arms crossed, trying to shake off the tension of the security raid. Krynn sat on the floor behind him, crouched over a strange circular device that pulsed faintly in his long fingers. "You're sure they're gone?" Karen's voice was hushed, but the edge of unease was clear. "They won't come back tonight," Jalen said, though he didn't believe it. "Security types don't like getting their boots wet unless they have to." For a moment, the city felt almost peaceful. Lights from the other platforms shimmering across the Veyron Sea like floating lanterns. Then, without warning, the sky cracked open with a thunderous roar. A column of orange fire erupted from the far end of the Spire district, followed by a shockwave that rattled the balcony under Jalen's feet. The metal platform quaked, and a cloud of smoke blossomed upward like a dark flower against the twin moons. "What the hell was that?" Jalen barked, ducking as a second explosion sent a rain of debris into the water below. Sirens wailed across the city, a discordant symphony rising from multiple towers. Krynn bolted to his side, the bioluminescent stripes along his arms flaring to a pale blue. "This is a prelude. They are testing the city's shields." Jalen squinted into the distance. The source of the blast was a cargo hub, one he knew handled both civilian shipments and military supplies. Flames licked the sky as drones zipped toward the disaster, their searchlights piercing the smoke. Then came the unmistakable sound, the low, tremoring hum of a rift-fire cannon charging somewhere above the clouds. The very air vibrated in Jalen's chest, and his combat instincts surged back like a flood. "They're here," he muttered. "Krynn Dominion." A streak of energy split the sky, illuminating the city in a flash of white-blue. It struck another platform 2 miles away, sending a geyser of water and steel into the sea. The floating city groaned like a wounded animal. Jalen grabbed Krynn by the shoulder. "We need to move. Now. If the shield grid doesn't come online, this place is done for." Krynn hesitated, glancing back toward the apartment. "My resonance node." "Forget the node!" Jalen snapped, already hauling him toward the stairwell. "You want to live? You stick with me!" As they sprinted down the trembling metal steps, lights flickered and alarms blared. A drone swooped low, projecting a holographic warning into the mist. City under attack. All civilians seek shelter immediately. A final blast echoed from the horizon. Through the fog and fire, Jalen caught the silhouette of a ship, a jagged, obsidian dagger gliding just above the cloud line. The Dominion had arrived, and their first strike had torn the illusion of safety to shreds. The acrid scent of burning metal still clung to the air as Veyron and Krynn darted through the narrow service corridors beneath Spire District. Emergency lights pulsed red along the walls, and the floor vibrated with distant impacts as the floating city endured the Krynn Dominion's bombardment. They ducked into a maintenance alcove just as a patrol of planetary security forces sprinted past, their boots pounding against the steel grates. Through the gaps in the wall, Jalen saw one of the soldiers glance over his shoulder, suspicion flaring in his eyes before he vanished into the smoke-filled passageway. Krynn's gills fluttered, nervously. "They're looking for me." Jalen gave him a sharp look. "They're looking for both of us now. We were on that balcony when the first strike hit. Someone probably flagged our signatures on the surveillance net." A sudden rumble shook the corridor, and a maintenance drone skittered past them, its optical sensors flickering. Its scanner paused on Krynn, emitting a soft chirp. The alien stiffened. "That's not good," he said. Before Jalen could ask, the drone beeped twice and sped off toward the upper decks. Krynn's bioluminescent stripes dimmed almost to black. "It just marked us." They crept back into the open, moving along the edge of a shattered walkway that overlooked the churning Veyron Sea. Spotlights from security drones swept the area, and in the distance, Jalen saw the unmistakable shape of a Krynn reconnaissance, pod gliding silently above the waves. It paused, scanning the debris. Jalen's stomach sank. "Great. Dominion scouts and local security. If either one catches us, we're done." "Not just done," Krynn muttered. "Exploited. Both sides will want to know what I am, and what I know." A flash lit the sky as another explosion rocked the platform, and shards of glass rained down like silver snow. Jalen pulled Krynn into the shadow of a support beam, heart hammering. He realized with grim clarity that surviving the bombardment wasn't enough. They were now fugitives, hunted by friend and foe alike. The sirens wailed across Aurelia Floats, a rising and falling mechanical scream that sliced through the rumble of distant explosions. Veyron burst out onto an open platform overlooking the Veyron Sea, the humid night air laced with the metallic tang of ozone and smoke. Above him, the entire sky pulsed crimson as the city's emergency beacons activated. Krynn staggered to his side, clutching the railing as the floating city swayed under another tremor. Far out beyond the glimmering perimeter lights, the shadows of the Krynn Dominion fleet materialized, sleek, jagged silhouettes tearing through the cloud cover. Their thrusters glowed like malevolent stars as they descended from the orbital fringe into the upper atmosphere. Then came the voice, over the loudspeakers, flat and cold. "Attention citizens of Aurelia Floats. Condition red. All civilians report to shelter nodes immediately. Repeat. Condition red. This is not a drill." Jalen's chest tightened. He'd heard that tone before, long ago during the war. The tone that told soldiers and civilians alike that the first layer of defense had already failed. He glanced toward the Spire District's skyline, normally a dazzling display of neon reflections, but now it was fractured by plumes of fire and smoke. "They're really doing it," Jalen muttered. "The Dominion's not just posturing anymore." Krynn's luminous eyes tracked the descending ships. "No, they're committing. They'll tear this city apart to make an example." Suddenly, streaks of blue-white light ripped through the night as Aurelia's defense cannons opened fire. Several beams struck one of the smaller Krynn vessels, sending it spiraling in flames into the sea. But for every ship that fell, two more pierced the cloud layer, their shields flaring under the assault. The floating city groaned as magnetic stabilizers shifted to compensate for shock waves. Below them, the sea roared, reflecting the chaotic dance of fire and metal in the skies. The wind carried the distant cries of civilians as evacuation pods launched from the lower decks, trailing long arcs of smoke toward the horizon. Jalen's instincts screamed at him to run, to find shelter, but he couldn't ignore the pit in his stomach, the one that told him this wasn't a battle he could simply hide from. He turned to Krynn, whose bioluminescent stripes flickered with a mix of fear and determination. "If we don't move, now we'll be trapped between the Dominion and the security forces." Krynn nodded grimly. "Then we move, but we don't run. We need to survive long enough to matter." As another explosion tore across the Spire district and the citywide, lights dimmed under the strain. Aurelia Floats shuddered like a wounded beast. Above, the Krynn fleet fully breached the cloud cover, their lead battleship eclipsing the twin moons. Red alert lights painted everything in a bloody glow. The war had returned to Jalen's doorstep, and this time, he couldn't pretend he was just a spectator. The first strike hit like a god's hammer. Veyron was halfway across the tiny living room, balancing a tray of reheated ration packs, when the world pitched sideways. A deafening boom rolled through Aurelia Floats, shaking the steel bones of the city and rattling every window in the Spire district. The tray launched from his hands, meals spinning weightlessly for a heartbeat before splattering across the floor. Alarms erupted, shrill, overlapping sirens that made his pulse spike. Beyond the apartment walls, a deep metallic groan echoed, the sound of the floating city flexing under sudden stress. Jalen stumbled toward the window, gripping the frame just as a second impact struck. This one came with a flash of crimson in the clouds and a shock wave that sent ripples racing across the Veyron Sea far below. Krynn Till burst from the kitchen alcove, their four-fingered hands clamped over their frilled ears. "This isn't a drill!" Krynn's voice wavered between panic and rage, their iridescent eyes catching the red strobe of emergency lights now flickering through the corridor. Jalen's soldier instincts surged to the surface, even if his stomach knotted with dread. "Get down!" he barked, pulling Krynn to the floor just as a third strike landed somewhere close. The whole apartment trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling vents. A shelf of old holophotos toppled, scattering images of quiet, meaningless days into chaos. From the panoramic window, the once pristine skyline was now fractured by smoke and fire. One of the auxiliary platforms, probably a residential ring, was burning, its anti-grav pylons flashing erratic blue as they strained to stay afloat. Swarms of civilian air skiffs darted in every direction, leaving streaks of light like panicked fireflies. Krynn crawled to the window, their crest flattening in fear. "Krynn plasma signatures," they whispered. "Direct atmospheric assault. They've breached the orbital blockade." Their trembling hand traced the distant shadows of the Dominion fleet, now visible between the clouds, sleek, predatory shapes dropping toward the city like vultures. The floor lurched again, pitching, forward this time, and Jalen grabbed the nearest support beam. He could hear distant explosions blending with the wail of the warning system, the mechanical voice repeating, "Red alert! Impact confirmed! Seek immediate shelter!" "We need to move," Jalen said, his voice firm but calm, even as adrenaline raced through him. "Hallways, interior side, away from glass." He reached for Krynn, and to his relief, they took his hand without protest. As they stumbled into the corridor, the world outside their apartment dissolved into chaos. Neighbors screamed and shoved past, some carrying children, others clutching. Emergency packs. The overhead lights flickered, and the floor plates groaned under uneven gravitational pulls as the city's stabilizers fought to keep balance. Another distant blast rolled through the air, softer this time, but no less ominous. Somewhere beyond Spire District, Aurelia Floats was bleeding. Jalen paused just long enough to glance back at the apartment, their fragile little world of bickering and awkward breakfasts. Smoke now curled past the windows like accusing fingers. He felt a weight in his chest, heavier than fear. This wasn't just war coming to his door. This was the end of the quiet life he'd tried to build, crashing down in fire and steel. Kryn's grip tightened. "If we survive this," they muttered, voice low and sharp, "we talk about rent later." Despite everything, Jalen almost laughed. Almost. The evacuation corridors were a maelstrom of sound and motion. Jalen Veyron pushed against the stream of panicked residents, his soldier's grip locked on Kryn Till's wrist to keep them from being swept away. The normally pristine Spire district had become a tangle of flashing red lights, swirling smoke, and the acrid stench of burnt circuitry. Somewhere deep in the city's underbelly, anti-gravity stabilizers hummed unevenly, and every tremor beneath. Their feet felt like a silent countdown. "Follow the yellow lights!" Jalen shouted over the chaos, pointing to the emergency guide strips glowing along the floor. Kryn stumbled behind him, their alien gait clumsy in the press of human bodies. Someone slammed into Jalen's shoulder. He grunted but didn't. "Stop." Above, the intercom blared. "All residents proceed to lower shelters immediately. Flooding in sectors Epsilon through Gamma. Repeat. Flooding detected." They rounded a corner into a side corridor and stopped short. Water was already there, dark and rippling, flooding the lower level like a creeping tide. Hollow signs flickered in the murk, and a few floating toys from some child's apartment bobbed past, surreal in the emergency strobe lights. It reached Jalen's calves, icy and shocking against his boots, and the current tugged harder than he expected. "Great," he muttered. "The stabilizers are dipping entire sections below sea level," Kryn hissed under their breath, scanning the ceiling for structural cracks. "Aurelia's float arrays weren't designed for sustained rift-fire impacts. If we stay here, we'll drown long before they finish shooting." They waded forward anyway, the water now swirling around their knees. Other residents hesitated at the edge of the flooded block, some crying, some frozen with fear. A woman with a small child clutched Jalen's sleeve. "Please, what do we do?" He glanced around, assessing like the soldier he once was. The emergency ladders leading up to higher walkways were partially submerged but still reachable. He pointed. "Climb those, stay high, and keep moving toward the central towers. Do not stay at ground level." The woman nodded frantically and pushed forward. Kryn tapped Jalen's arm. "Listen," they said. Over the echo of alarms and rushing feet, he heard it. Distant creaks and groans of metal under strain. The kind of sound that precedes collapse. Suddenly, the floor plate beneath them shuddered, and a geyser of seawater erupted through a ruptured vent. People screamed as the waves surged, knocking two civilians off their feet. Without thinking, Jalen lunged, grabbing one man by the collar and dragging him upright. Kryn extended their long arms and snagged the other, their claws hooking gently into the man's jacket. They hauled him back to a ladder platform as more water poured in. By the time the crowd scrambled upward, the water was already waist-deep, swirling with debris, shards of glass, pieces of furniture, even a floating cleaning drone sparking weakly. Jalen and Kryn climbed after the last evacuees, dripping and shivering, their hearts hammering. From this higher walkway, the flooded sector looked like a half-submerged graveyard of neon and steel. Hollow ads flickered underwater like drowned ghosts. Jalen leaned against the railing, catching his breath. "This city, I used to think it was untouchable." Kryn's frilled ears twitched, droplets cascading down. "No city floats forever." "Jalen, not in war!" The words hung heavy between them, carried on the distant echoes of more explosions. Somewhere far above, a new alarm began to wail, deeper, more insistent. The next wave of destruction was coming, and they were still trapped, in a city that might not survive the night. Jalen Veyron had spent years on military deployments, but nothing in the endless black of space had ever felt as immediate, or as personal, as the chaos unfolding in Spire District. From the elevated walkway, he looked down at the half-submerged streets. Civilians clung to balconies, and others huddled in stairwells above the rising flood, their faces ghostly in the red emergency glow. Smoke curled upward from ruptured conduits, while far overhead, the sky roared with the distant hum of Krynn Dominion fighters circling for another strike. Care and Till crouched beside him, their luminous eyes reflecting the broken lights below. "If we wait for the planetary guard," they said quietly, "these people won't make it. They'll either drown or burn." Jalen clenched his fists. His training told him to hold position, wait for official evacuation protocols. But his gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive in the outer belt skirmishes, screamed that time had run out. "You're right," he said finally, his voice steady. "We can't wait. We're saving the district. Or we're going. Down with it." The alien's frills quivered, a motion he had learned to read as equal parts excitement and anxiety. "Good. Then you'll need my knowledge and my tools." Karen unstrapped a slim metallic device from the satchel they had stubbornly kept through the whole evacuation. The rod hummed as they extended it, revealing a series of prongs etched with bioluminescent glyphs. Jalen stared. "That's not regulation human tech. It's an adaptive pulse conduit. It can patch failing energy nodes if I get close enough," Karen said. They glanced at the streets below. "The flood is shorting Aurelia's local shield generators. If we reactivate them, we can redirect emergency power to seal this sector from more water." Jalen grinned, despite the smoke stinging his eyes. "Then let's move." They descended together, splashing back into the cold, debris-filled water. Jalen led the way to the first generator node, a steel column rising from the flooded street corner, half submerged, its indicator lights dark. Karen climbed onto it with a fluid motion, talons digging into the slick surface, and pressed the conduit into a maintenance port. The device sang with a low harmonic, and the air shimmered as the generator groaned awake. One by one, the sector's minor shields flickered to life, forming faint walls of light against the incoming tide. Citizens cheered from above, their voices muffled by the rain and alarms. But the victory was short-lived. A deep rumble shook the entire district, followed by a shriek of twisting metal. A nearby platform, weighed down by water, gave way with a deafening crack, sending 2 civilians tumbling into the current. Without thinking, Jalen dove, the cold shock stealing his breath. He caught the first figure, an older man, while Karen extended their long arms to grab the second, a teenager flailing in panic. With a coordinated effort, they pulled both to safety on a floating cargo crate, then pushed them toward the nearest ladder. Jalen gasped for air, his muscles burning. "We need a plan to get everyone out. Shields alone won't hold if another wave hits." Karen tapped the conduit, thinking fast. "If we stabilize 3 more generators, we can create a temporary dry corridor leading straight to the central towers. But..." They glanced skyward, where flashes of green rift fire illuminated the clouds. "We'll be exposed the whole time." "Then we move fast," Jalen said. His voice had that hard edge he hadn't heard since his last deployment. "You focus on the tech. I'll handle anyone in trouble." For the next hour, they worked in tandem. Karen leaping from flooded platform to platform, singing to the conduit in their native tongue as the generators pulsed back to life, while Jalen swam, waded, and climbed to pull stranded civilians from windows and railings. At one point, he used an abandoned skiff as a makeshift ferry, guiding a group of children across the waterlogged street while Karen lit the way with their bioluminescent frills. Bit by bit, order returned to the chaos. A shimmering corridor of activated shields parted the flood like a glowing canyon, and neighbors helped neighbors across, some crying in relief. Jalen felt something stir in his chest. Pride, maybe, or the strange warmth of knowing he wasn't alone in this fight. Then, just as the last family reached safety, a bone-rattling explosion split the air. A shockwave rolled across the district, toppling debris and extinguishing several shield nodes at once. Jalen spun toward the source and saw it. High above, a new wave of Krynn ships diving, their engines screaming. The war had found them again, and the respite they'd fought for was already slipping away. Krynn met his gaze, rain streaming down their alien features. "We're not done yet," they said. Jalen nodded grimly, gripping the edge of the nearest platform as the sky turned. A violent, pulsing green. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Jalen Veyron had never imagined that his quiet life on Aurelia Floats would end with him sprinting through a storm of plasma fire, carrying a wounded neighbor on his back. Yet here he was, sloshing. Through waist-deep water, Krynn Till just ahead of him, their bioluminescent frills flickering like a living beacon amid the smoke and rain. The Krynn Dominion's attack had intensified, turning Spire District into a gauntlet of chaos. Above, the sky writhed with streaks of green rift fire and blue planetary defense beams. Explosions rippled across the floating city, sending tremors down every metal strut and making the flooded streets churn like an angry sea. From the upper balconies, panicked residents shouted for help, some too frightened to climb down to the rescue corridor that Jalen and Krynn had fought so hard to create. "We need to get them moving," Jalen yelled over the roar of engines and sirens. He eased the injured man onto a floating crate, then turned toward a stairwell where a small family huddled. "Hey, shields are up! Follow the lights! Go now!" Krynn vaulted onto a balcony railing, their talons clicking against the slick metal. "Listen to him! The next strike won't wait for your fear!" Their voice carried an uncanny resonance, part command, part alien song. The family stirred, hesitating, then finally began their descent, clinging to each other. Another explosion cracked the air, closer this time. A spray of hot shrapnel hissed into the water. Jalen dove, tackling a child just in time, feeling the heat graze the back of his neck. He surfaced, coughing, and caught Kryn's eyes across the flooded street. Both of them knew they were living on borrowed seconds. They fell into a rhythm, Jalen pulling people from windows and lifting them over debris, Krynn stabilizing flickering shield nodes and directing frightened civilians. In between, Jalen used his military instincts to anticipate danger, shouting warnings and pointing out safe routes through the mess of collapsed platforms. His body burned with fatigue, but he pushed harder, spurred by the raw determination in Kryn's alien gaze. At one point, a Krynn fighter swooped low, its engines shrieking as it released a spray of microbombs toward the sector. The pair reacted in perfect sync. Krynn activated a temporary energy bubble with their conduit, and Jalen herded the last group of stragglers under the awning of a reinforced tower. The shockwave rattled the district, but the shield held long enough to save them. The floodlights flickered. Smoke hung heavy in the damp air, carrying the bitter scent of ozone and burnt metal. In that haze, the two unlikely heroes stood surrounded. By neighbors they'd never really known, humans and aliens alike, faces streaked with water and soot but alive. Some whispered thanks. Others just stared, wide-eyed. Jalen felt the weight of their gazes and shook his head. "Don't thank me yet," he muttered. He glanced skyward, where more Krynn ships pierced the cloud layer, their silhouettes growing larger. This was the easy part. Kryn's frills dimmed and brightened in a slow pulse. "Then we keep going. We're not dying in this district. Not tonight." A distant siren wailed, a deeper, more urgent tone. Aurelia's citywide. Announcement echoed through the storm. "All citizens prepare, second wave incoming." Jalen took a deep breath, feeling the cold bite of the water against his armor and the thrumming fear in his chest. Somehow, against all odds, they had become the line between survival and disaster for Spire District. And with the next attack approaching, they had no choice but to hold it. The sirens of Aurelia Floats wailed like a wounded animal, a deep mechanical howl echoing across the storm-lashed Veyron Sea. Veyron stood knee-deep in cold water on the fractured platform of Spire District, his pulse pounding in his ears. Around him, neighbors huddled together, shivering, terrified, but alive. Above, the clouds glowed a sickly green as the second wave of Krynn Dominion ships pierced the upper atmosphere, their sleek, predatory silhouettes framed by flashes of distant lightning. Krynn splashed through the shallows, carrying an armful of scavenged components from a half-collapsed shield node. Their frills flared bright against the dim light, a mix of urgency and focus. If we don't reinforce the Spire shield emitters, this district won't survive the next volley, they said, their voice vibrating with that eerie resonance that always carried through the chaos. We have maybe 20 minutes, if the wind favors us. Jalen's military instincts were already in motion. He scanned the debris-littered street, noting the structural weak points and the remaining operable shield pylons. "All right," he said, his voice steady, masking the tension in his chest. "We split into teams. I'll get the civilians to higher ground and fortify the west corridor. You handle the emitters. When the second wave hits, we need a fallback point, or we're done." Krynn tilted their head, their luminous eyes reflecting the stormlight. "Fallback points are for people expecting to lose." Despite everything, Jalen almost smiled. "Then let's make sure we don't." They moved fast. Jalen led the strongest volunteers to drag floating debris into makeshift barriers, while Krynn scaled the damaged pylons, their claws clicking on the metal as they rewired conduits with an almost musical rhythm. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the curved horizon of the floating city. From this height, Jalen could see the defensive shield shimmering faintly above the central districts. But here on the outskirts, the glow was fractured, thin. If the Krynn decided to target Spire District directly, it would take only a few hits to break them. The first tremor of the second wave's assault rolled across the sea, a low vibration that sent ripples through the flooded streets. Jalen glanced up and caught sight of the lead Krynn frigate, sleek as a hunting spear, breaking formation as smaller attack craft peeled off toward the district. He could almost feel the heat of their engines even from here. "Krynn!" he shouted. "There! Coming in low." "Almost done," came the reply. Sparks rained down from a pylon as the alien twisted a final cable into place. A low hum filled the air, and suddenly a faint shimmer rippled around the district, the local shield grid flickering to life. The residents cheered, but Jalen raised his hand to quiet them. "Don't celebrate yet. That'll only buy us time." If on cue, the Krynn fighters swooped into range. The first plasma bolt splashed against the resurrected shield, sending arcs of blue energy dancing along the edges. The impact rattled Jalen's bones, but the barrier held, for now. He moved to Krynn's side as the alien dropped lightly from the pylon, their bioluminescence pulsing with effort and adrenaline. Together, they surveyed the chaos they had managed to carve into something like order. The makeshift barricades might slow debris or shrapnel. The shield emitters could deflect a few hits. The evacuation route toward the higher Spire towers was mostly clear. For the first time in hours, Jalen felt like they had a fighting chance. Then a distant, guttural rumble rolled across the sea, louder than any thunder. He turned his eyes skyward and froze. Breaking through the cloud cover came something massive. A Krynn dread carrier, its hull bristling with rift fire cannons, descending like a nightmare given shape. Even Kryn's confident posture faltered at the sight. The ship's size dwarfed the floating city beneath it, casting a shadow that swallowed Spire District whole. "That," Krynn said quietly, "is not a second wave. That is the war!" The civilians murmured in fear, some collapsing to their knees. Jalen clenched his fists, feeling the tremor of his own heartbeat against the cold steel of his rifle. The air stank of ozone and seawater, and the sound of the dread carrier's engines was like a living storm. He exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle over him. "Then we fight the war," he said, meeting Kryn's gaze. "And we make sure Spire District is still standing when it's done." Kryn's frills flared again, brighter this time, like a battle flag in the gloom. "Together, they," said somewhere deep in the city. A voice crackled over the emergency comms. "All units prepare for full-scale engagement. Shield arrays at maximum. Civilians, brace for impact." As the first rift fire beam from the dread carrier lanced toward the city, Jalen and Krynn took their positions, ready for the battle that would decide Aurelia's fate. The first warning came as a tremor beneath Veyr's feet. He was on the balcony of their small apartment in Spire District, staring out at the endless sweep of Veyron Sea, when the distant hum grew into a roar. Krynn Till appeared behind him, her bioluminescent markings flickering anxiously. Then the sky split open. Streaks of crimson plasma cut through the cloud cover, reflecting off the floating spires of Aurelia Floats like jagged lightning. Explosions blossomed in the distance, shattering observation decks and sending fountains of seawater high into the air. The city lurched under the first direct hit, its stabilizers groaning like a wounded beast. "Rift fire rounds," Jalen muttered, instinct, snapping into place as old battlefield memories surged. He grabbed Kryn's arm and yanked her back inside just as a concussive blast shattered their balcony railing. Shards of metal and glass rained down into the lower decks. Sirens wailed, joined by the deep rhythmic pulses of the planetary. "Defense alarm." Holographic warnings blinked across their walls. "Aurelia under attack. Seek shelter." Krynn darted to the window, her four-fingered hands pressed against the glass. "They've breached the orbital fringe already. The Krynn, don't waste time." Her voice carried a trembling mixture of awe and dread. Another impact rocked the Spire District. Across the canal, a luxury residential platform tilted sharply as a support pylon collapsed into the sea. People screamed, scrambling across tilting walkways slick with ocean spray. Jalen's gut clenched. He had trained for wars in empty space, but seeing civilians trapped above the endless blue water made everything feel more fragile, more terrifying. "We need to move," he said, already strapping on his old combat harness. "If the stabilizers go, the spire will slide into the sea." Kryn's frilled ears twitched, catching a sound he didn't yet hear. Moments later, the ominous hum of descending dropships cut through the storm. Through the haze, he glimpsed the dark angular shapes of Krynn landing craft, bristling with weapon pods, sinking toward the lower districts like metal predators. "Dropships on the east approach!" Krynn barked, switching to a clipped military tone that startled him. "They'll sweep the residential decks first." Jalen kicked open their emergency kit, tossing her a breather mask and grabbing a compact plasma rifle he hadn't touched since discharge. The apartment shook violently again, this time with a drawn-out metallic screech. He knew that sound, a hull breach in one of the mid-tier platforms. Through the window, the once idyllic cityscape had become a war zone. Fire and smoke bled into the twilight, and the sea below churned with falling debris. A transport skiff full of evacuees tilted, then capsized under a shockwave, scattering tiny figures into the water. For a moment, Jalen froze. The weight of helplessness pressed down, memories of battlefield evacuations, of friends he couldn't save. Krynn placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Her alien eyes, glowing faintly in the flickering emergency light, met his. "We can't save everyone from here, but we can survive, and maybe make a difference." He nodded, forcing his breathing steady. The city trembled again as another plasma barrage struck somewhere near the core. This wasn't a random raid. The Krynn were here to finish what they started. Jalen tightened the strap of his harness and shouldered the rifle. "Then let's move, before Aurelia sinks beneath us." They bolted into the corridor as the floating city wailed under fire, smoke rising into the crimson-streaked sky, the war truly beginning above the endless waves. Veyron sprinted down the trembling walkway, Krynn Till right behind him, as Aurelia Floats groaned under another barrage. The once polished Spire district was now a maze of smoke, shattered glass, and the distant screams of panicked civilians. Ahead, the transit tube leading to Halden Station, home of the city's shield array controls, flickered with emergency lights. "Halden Station is the only way to bring up the shields," Jalen said, panting as he vaulted a collapsed handrail. "If the Krynn disable that, we're done." Kryn's bioluminescent markings flared, casting eerie glows across the metal walls. "They'll have it guarded, or worse, sabotaged. We'll need to move fast and quiet." The transit tube's maglev cars were frozen mid-track, their power cut during the attack. Smoke coiled inside and water sloshed ankle-deep from ruptured coolant lines. Jalen cursed under his breath. "Looks like we're walking." They slipped into the tube, the muffled rumble of distant explosions reverberating like a heartbeat. Krynn moved with unnerving grace, her alien senses guiding her around unseen hazards. Jalen followed, his combat instincts kicking in, scanning every corner for movement. Halfway through, a sharp metallic clang echoed. Jalen raised his rifle and Krynn flattened against the wall. From the far end, the ominous silhouette of a Krynn scout emerged, tall insectoid armor glinting under. The emergency lights, its glowing optics, swept the tunnel, hunting. Jalen whispered, "One patrol. We take it out. Fast." Kryn's frills twitched. "On 3. They struck in unison. Jalen's rifle spat blue fire, searing into the scout's chest plate, while Krynn leapt onto its back, driving a retractable plasma blade into the armor seam. The creature hissed in its alien tongue before collapsing into the shallow water. Steam rose around its smoking frame. "Efficient," Krynn muttered, retrieving her blade. "But the others will notice." They pushed on, heartbeats pounding. At last, the maglev tube opened into Halden Station, a sprawling control hub perched over the central buoyancy core. Emergency lights strobed across panels and hollow terminals, casting the place in crimson and shadow. A single window showed the chaos outside, Krynn dropships descending like vultures, plasma fire lighting the horizon. Jalen rushed to the main console, his fingers flying across the holographic keys. "The Aurelia shield array. Offline. Safety locked after the first strike." Krynn bent over the secondary panel, her alien eyes scanning data streams. "I can override the safety. But once we do this, they'll know exactly where we are." "Then, let them come," Jalen said, teeth clenched. "We raise the shields, or this city dies." Together, they worked, the human soldier and the alien outcast, syncing their movements as if they had trained for this moment. Sparks showered from a ruptured conduit, alarms screamed, and the floor trembled beneath them. Finally, Krynn slammed her palm onto the override. "Do it, Jalen!" He hit the final command. Across the city, blue-white domes of energy began to rise, shimmering like a second ocean above the floating platforms. The Aurelia shield array was alive. Outside, the first Krynn plasma bolts struck the barrier and burst into harmless ripples of light. Inside the station, Jalen and Krynn locked eyes, breathless. They had bought Aurelia a fighting chance, but the war was far from over. The Aurelia shield array shimmered across the sky like a celestial dome, but victory lasted only moments. A deafening metallic groan reverberated through Halden Station as the access doors on the far side were torn open. Smoke and sparks filled the control hub, and through the haze emerged a towering figure, Commander Zerk of the Krynn Dominion, clad in jagged black armor that gleamed under the emergency lights. Jalen Vare's blood ran cold. He'd faced enemy, soldiers before, but the Dominion's field commanders were the stuff of nightmares, whispered about in barracks during the war. Zerk's multifaceted eyes glowed amber, and his voice was a guttural rumble, translated through a synthetic modulator. "Human traitor," Zerk snarled, his gaze sliding to Krynn Till. and a defected spawn of the Triarch. Fitting you die together. Karen's frills stiffened, her markings flickering in defiance. I was never yours to claim, Zerk. He raised his weapon, a plasma glaive crackling with violet energy. Then neither of you will leave this station alive. Jalen dove behind a console as the first strike sent sparks exploding into the air. Karen rolled across the floor, hurling a flash charge that bathed the chamber in white light. Zerk roared, swinging blindly, his glaive cleaving a support strut in half. Keep him busy, Jalen shouted over the alarms. I'll flank him. Karen's movements were a blur, every step precise as she vaulted over panels and sent bursts of alien energy fire toward the Krynn commander. They barely left scorch marks on his armor. Busy is easy. Hurting him is the problem. Jalen dashed along the station's outer ring, his boots splashing through water pooled from ruptured pipes. He spotted an overhead crane and leapt for the control lever. With a screech of metal, a suspended fuel cell swung down like a pendulum. Zerk blocked the first swing with his glaive, but the impact staggered him just long enough for Karen to land a kick squarely into his chest. The commander skidded back, bellowing, then slammed the butt of his glaive onto the floor. The shockwave rippled through the chamber, knocking Jalen flat and sending Karen sprawling into a console. Lights flickered and the station groaned under the force. Pain lanced up Jalen's shoulder, but he forced himself to move. He's trying to disable the shields. Indeed, Zerk's clawed hand reached for the primary control column, his armor crackling with energy. Karen's eyes widened. If he corrupts the core, Aurelia will sink before the next volley. Summoning every ounce of strength, Jalen grabbed a fallen plasma cutter and charged. Zerk spun, glaive raised, but Karen lunged first, intercepting the strike with her energy blade. Sparks and violet arcs lit the room as alien steel met alien. Plasma. Jalen seized the opening. He leapt onto the commander's back, plunging the plasma cutter into a gap beneath the armored shoulder plate. The smell of scorched metal and alien ichor filled the air. Zerk roared, thrashing violently, slamming Jalen against a pillar, but the soldier held on. Karen dove under the swing of the glaive and jammed her blade deep into the joint of Zerk's knee. The giant faltered, bellowing, and Jalen twisted, the cutter with a final desperate surge. Energy arced across Zerk's body before he collapsed to one knee, then toppled with a splash into the shallow water flooding the floor. Both of them staggered back, panting, hearts pounding. Karen's voice trembled, but her eyes were sharp. He's down, but not dead. Krynn commanders don't fall this easily. Jalen wiped sweat and water from his face, glancing toward the station's entrance where more shadows moved in the smoke. Then we'd better move. His friends are coming. Through the shattered window, the war above the Veyron Sea raged on, streaks of plasma fire illuminating the dome of Aurelia's shields. The fight wasn't over. If anything, it had only begun. The control hub reeked of smoke and ozone. Sparks rained from the ceiling as Jalen Veyer staggered back to the Aurelia shield array console, blood running warm down his temple. Karen Till limped beside him, clutching her side where Zerk's shockwave had thrown her against a metal beam. Their breaths echoed in the sudden, heavy quiet, only the hum of the shield generator and the distant rumble of the battle above. The waves remained. "Stay with me," Jalen murmured, voice raw. He slapped the emergency override, and a holographic panel bloomed into life. The shield integrity hovered at 42%. One more volley from the Krynn fleet and Aurelia Floats would sink beneath the Veyron Sea. Karen's frills flickered weakly as she reached across him, fingers dancing over the alien glyphs she understood better than he ever could. I can stabilize the conduit, but someone has to manually vent the overflow from the lower core. Her eyes met his. It's outside, on the ledge. Jalen's gut twisted. The ledge was barely wide enough for a single person, exposed to open sky and enemy fire. I'll do it. She hesitated, but her voice carried the stubborn warmth he'd come to know. No, soldier. You hold the shield steady. I'm lighter and faster." Before he could argue, Krynn pushed open the hatch. Wind roared in, carrying the salty tang of the sea and the acrid bite of burning fuel. Her silhouette vanished onto the narrow ledge, clinging to the edge of the floating station like a silver-blue phantom. Jalen watched her through the viewport, heart pounding. The Krynn fleet still rained plasma across Aurelia's surface. Explosions rippled in the distance, sending waterspouts high into the air. He gritted his teeth, muttering to himself, "Come on, Krynn, come on!" Lightning danced along the station's metal skin as she jammed a conduit wrench into the release valve. A flash of green light surged up the array's spines, and the holographic display jumped. Shield integrity 68%, then 81%. A booming cheer rose from the civilian channels over the comms. "The shield is holding," someone cried. But the victory came with a cost. A stray Krynn fighter broke through the outer defensive grid, plasma cannons blazing. One shot clipped the ledge near Krynn, sending shards of molten metal flying. She lost her grip for a breathless second before catching the rail with one hand dangling over the endless sea. "Krynn!" Jalen slammed his palm against the glass. "Hold on!" With a desperate swing, she pulled herself back up, smoke curling from her scorched shoulder guard. She stumbled into the hatch just as another blast rocked the station, tumbling straight into Jalen's arms. "You're insane," he whispered, holding her close. Her laugh was weak, breathless, but real. "And you would have done the same." The shield surged to full strength, shimmering across the sky like a living aurora. For the first time in hours, the enemy fire faltered. The Krynn ships began to pull back, regrouping beyond the orbital fringe. Aurelia Floats had survived. For now, Jalen carried Krynn to the console's base as sirens shifted to a lower, steadier tone. Around them, the city's lights flickered back to life. Relief rippled through his chest, tangled with something heavier, something he didn't want to name yet. She met his eyes, exhaustion softening her alien features. "Don't let go." "Never," he promised, though the storm outside promised they'd only bought themselves time. The sun rose over the Veyron Sea like molten gold spilling across a sheet of sapphire. Aurelia Floats drifted quietly, its once trembling platforms now steady. Against the gentle roll of the waves, the smell of smoke still clung to the air, mingling with salt water and the faint aroma of street vendors already rebuilding their stalls in Spire District. Jalen Veyron stood on the balcony outside their battered apartment, leaning on the railing with his bandaged arm. The shield dome shimmered faintly overhead, catching the morning light, a reminder that the city had survived because of them. Inside, Krynn hummed a soft alien tune, her frills pulsing with each note as she brewed something that smelled suspiciously like seaweed tea. Despite the exhaustion etched into every movement, there was a new warmth in her gestures, a quiet contentment that mirrored Jalen's own. He glanced back into the apartment. The floor was still scorched from when the ceiling conduit had blown during the last attack. Their furniture was dented, cracked, or flipped entirely. And yet, seeing her there in the soft morning light, it felt like home. "You're staring," Krynn said without turning. Her voice was teasing, lilting in that way that once drove him crazy, but now made him smile. "Just making sure you're real," he replied. "After last night, I half expect to wake up and find out this was some weird post-battle dream." She turned to face him, a mug in each hand. "If this is your dream, soldier, it's a messy one." He laughed quietly, taking the mug and savoring the strange, savory warmth. The city's morning hum was returning. Repair drones zipped between. Towers, shuttle barges ferried survivors and supplies, and distant bells rang as families reunited on floating plazas. Life, against all odds, was finding its rhythm again. Then came a low rumble, not of danger this time, but of the ocean below. Deep, and endless. Jalen felt the vibration through the metal beneath his boots, the pulse of a living city clinging to survival. He looked at Krynn, who was gazing out over the water, her expression soft and far away. "You're thinking about leaving," he said gently. She tilted her head, frills flickering. "I was. Krynn Dominion fleets don't forget. Staying here. It's dangerous. For you. For me." Jalen set his mug down, stepping closer. "Then we face it together. I'm done running from battles, Krynn. And I'm done living alone." Her eyes met his, luminous and strange, yet filled with something human in its simplicity. Connection. Trust. A quiet, blooming affection that neither of them had dared name until now. She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders melting away. "Together, then." From below, a cheer rose as another rescue skimmer docked, bringing in the last wave of survivors from the outer decks. Somewhere, a child laughed, the sound bright against the endless sea. The sky above was clear, but the scars of the night before lingered in the form of drifting smoke and shattered panels along Aurelia's spine. Krynn reached out, brushing her cool fingers against Jalen's hand. He squeezed back, grounding them both in the fragile present. Around them, the city floated on, bruised but unbroken. "Think they'll make us heroes?" Jalen asked, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Probably," Krynn said, smirking. "But I prefer breakfast first." They stood in companionable silence as the wind carried the scent of salt and sunrise across the balcony. For the first time since the Krynn invasion began, hope didn't feel like a luxury. It felt like a choice. And as Aurelia Floats drifted beneath the growing light, Jalen and Krynn chose it, together, ready for whatever storms tomorrow might bring. And so, Aurelia Floats drifted quietly on the endless Veyron Sea, scarred but unbroken. Jalen Veyr and Krynn Till, once just an unlikely pair of roommates, had faced fire, chaos, and the impossible, only to discover friendship, love, and a home they never expected. Their story reminds us that even in the darkest storms, connection can light the way. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more epic sci-fi adventures. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there are so many more waiting for you.